A big welcome into lcpioneers.com live, presented by PioStream, as we are with you Tuesday through Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time on Facebook Live. You can find all of our shows available to watch on demand at youtube.com/lcpioneers, lcpios specifically for that link. And we like to keep you connected with student athletes, coaches, members from the Lewis and Clark community, and our alumni base as well, 4 days a week. Thanks for being here. I am Ryan Goff. I am the play-by-play voice and director of athletic communications for Lewis and Clark. We're the Pioneers out of Portland, Oregon, and members of the Northwest Conference, competing with 19 intercollegiate athletics programs in the 9-team Northwest Conference against other institutions from throughout Northwest Oregon and the state of Washington, and a chance with over 430 teams across the NCAA Division III level, a chance for our student athletes to compete on the national stage. And in non-pandemic times, certainly with Lewis and Clark sporting a robust overseas study program, a chance for our student athletes to also get experience around the globe with experiential liberal arts education. We'll have a chance today to talk to Bridget Flaherty today, the Associate Director of International Students and Scholars at Lewis and Clark. And this has been one of the many benefits of having this show that dates back to the final day of March last year, is a chance to find out more about different areas of Lewis and Clark outside of athletics that help support the student experience at Lewis and Clark, and in many ways have an effect, a long-lasting effect on our student athletes as well. International Students and Scholars is part of the Division of Student Life, so we look forward to catching up with Bridget and find out some of the marquee events that happen through the office, and then certainly ways that student athletes can get involved with the office as well. If you have a comment or a question for our guest today, you're welcome to let us know in the chat. You can do so by just typing in your comment on Facebook Live. You can always email us as well. That's a great way to stay in touch with the show and let us know if you have a question for an upcoming guest or a suggestion for a future guest. We always encourage you to do that. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram. We are LC Pioneers on both of those platforms as well. And we continue to update our website with information pertaining to athletics and COVID-19, those athletic-specific information pieces available at lcpioneers.com/COVID. And that's an important bookmark for information coming from the NCAA, the Northwest Conference, or something very specific to athletics that might be from the state or county. We also have a link directly to the Lewis and Clark College website in regards to COVID-19 updates as well. And then I mentioned, if you click on the fan zone on that top bar, you can find all of our past episodes of lcpioneers.com live, or of course, go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/lcpios, as I mentioned before, our latest interview with the assistant women's basketball coach and former men's basketball student athlete, Scott Pisapia. We had that conversation last Friday. All right, let's bring in our guest for today. We're excited to welcome in the Associate Director of the International Students and Scholars Office. We welcome Bridget Flaherty to lcpioneers.com live. Bridget, thank you for taking the time. And as I mentioned, this has been one of my favorite aspects of the show, is to have a chance to talk to people from outside the athletics department. And while you're still in the division, it is interesting to find out more about what the experience at Lewis and Clark is like and how you support international students and scholars. So let's kind of start with an overview, go to the highest level, the 1,000-foot overview of what things look like. What is it that the Office of International Students and Scholars provides the community at Lewis and Clark?
Sure. So we actually work with two main student populations. One group are the international students who need a visa to come study here. And then there's also the third culture kids, which basically that's someone who has spent part of their life growing up in a culture outside their home country. And so we have quite a few US citizens that are students here that identify as third culture kids, or TCKs as we call them. And so we are here to support both of those groups, but we actually start in the admissions process. We read applications and visit high schools for students that are living around the world and help them through the application process and admissions. And then once they're here, our office is here to support them through many different things. For the international students, that includes visa advising as well as academic advising, cultural adjustment. A lot of that's the same for the TCKs as well, other than the visa aspect of that.
We always like to kind of get origin stories on this show. We have this conversation with many of our student athletes and certainly alumni from the athletics department, but let's get yours as well, because I'm always interested to find out what brought somebody to Lewis and Clark. Describe how long you've been at Lewis and Clark and what attracted you to this opportunity.
Sure. Yeah. As of this summer, I will have been here for 10 years. And I went to college in Portland, but I went to University of Portland, and I knew of Lewis and Clark at the time and knew of its good reputation. And when I was looking to come back to Portland later on for work, this opportunity popped up at Lewis and Clark, and I was really excited about it. And I'd say part of what brought me here was the community, like the students and faculty and staff that I met during the interview process. And that's really what's kept me here. Anytime people ask me what's my favorite thing about Lewis and Clark, I always say it's the people. I feel like it's a really kind and caring community, and I, as a staff member, I feel that, and I think that students definitely feel that as well.
Now, as the associate director, I'm curious, if you can give us an idea of how many people work in the office and just more of a specific glimpse into what your kind of day to day or some of the key aspects about what you bring as the associate director to the office. Kind of give us an overview of your role.
Sure. We have three full time professional staff in the office. So that's the director, Brian White, myself, and then our administrative specialist, which is Paula Dennis. We also have one student intern in our office. She's our third culture kid intern. And every year we have someone who has that TCK background themselves who oversees the TCK board and the types of events that they put on. So in my role, I definitely, a big chunk of it is focused on the admissions piece, particularly at this time of year. So I'm reading applications, sending admissions decisions, but I also do a lot of the visa and immigration advising as well. And then one of the parts of my job that I really enjoy is advising our international student board. It's called the ISLC, and it's a branch of the main student government, the ASLC, Associated Students of Lewis and Clark. And so I really enjoy working with them, helping them with like the events that they want to put on throughout the year, such as the International Fair, which is kind of the biggest event of the year that we have coming up in March.
We're talking to Bridget Flaherty, the Associate Director of International Students and Scholars on lcpioneers.com live. And I am very eager to get to the International Fair because I'm always interested in some of those hallmark, big events that are on campus. But one thing specific to student athletes, I'm curious, what kind of overlap do you see with athletics at Lewis and Clark, intercollegiate athletics, and your office?
We actually have quite a few students through the years that have been both an international student or a TCK as well as a student athlete. For instance, every year we seem to have students, international students that are on the tennis team, as well as things like cross country, crew. There's been, even this year, we actually have a couple students on the football team, which isn't always as common for us. But so one thing that I think is nice is that student athletes, I think, already have some extra support when they're here on campus because of their coaches that are helping them and supporting them. And then international students and TCKs have the extra support because of our office. And so I feel like these students that are here and have both of those identities, that they're really getting a lot of extra support from both athletics as well as the ISS office. And I've found that our students that are also student athletes, they tend to be really engaged and really involved in other activities too outside of the team that they're playing on.
What are some of your favorite aspects then? The opportunity to work with students. You talked about advising and then getting to help plan these events. When it gets when you get in front of students and you have the opportunity to actually work with them at Lewis and Clark, what are some of your favorite aspects about that opportunity?
I would say, I mean, it's a couple different things. One of them is like I've lived in a couple other countries myself, although as an adult, not as a younger child like a lot of our TCKs. But I know what it's like to be in a new country where you are experiencing culture shock, where you either don't speak the language or it's not your first language. And I really enjoy helping students through that process. I had considered working and study abroad, but I realized that I'd rather work with students when they're in the country they're studying in and going through that process and learning about this new culture. And then along the same lines, I love to learn about other countries and other cultures. I love to travel myself. I get to do a little bit of travel for work when I visit some high schools in other countries for the admissions process. But a lot of the year I'm here, but I feel like I'm constantly learning from our students by having conversations with them about what things are like for them at home and what are some of the cultural differences they're seeing here in the US.
I remember reading as I was getting ready for the interview about your experience traveling overseas yourself, and it did make me curious, kind of what developed in terms of why you had an itch to travel internationally. What was it about the opportunity to work with international students? You kind of alluded to taking care of them at Lewis and Clark. Did you always know that like the experience of traveling internationally was something you'd be interested in?
Yeah, I think that from a really young age, like I'm a big reader. I love to read and I've always loved to learn that way. And I was always interested in reading things about other cultures. And so by the time I got to high school and I had a chance to go on a language trip with my French class to Europe, and I loved that experience. And basically, having that experience was really what sparked that in me to then want to continue to travel when I could. So I've done, of course, my own like personal travel and some vacations and things in other countries. But then in college, I spent a year in Austria. And then after I was finished my bachelor's degree, I taught English in Japan for a year. And really, out of those two experiences, is when I started to figure out that I wanted to work in higher ed. And at the time, I thought either study abroad or working with international students. And once I started working with international students, I've loved it and have continued doing that.
All right, let's shift the conversation toward the international fair. In non pandemic times, because I know there's some uniqueness coming up, give us just an overview of how special this event is for your office and your community and some of the value that it provides the entire community at Lewis and Clark.
Yeah, it's traditionally been a 1 day event that in the international fair would be in the first Saturday of March. And the students spend months planning for this event, and I'm supporting them through that as well. And basically, the main components are a meal that happens like a brunch on Saturday, where all of the food has been prepared by students using recipes that they have gotten from their families at home. And they're making that food themselves and then serving it to the campus community, as well as some people that come from off campus to come enjoy that as well. And then during the meal, they'll have different display tables where they're sharing activities and photos and videos and things showing more about their culture. And then the second part of the day is the performance. And that takes place in the chapel every year. And it's students doing performances from their home cultures. For a lot of them, it's dance. It's often a pretty dance heavy show because a lot of our students love to dance and show that part of their culture. But they've also done other things like even things like comedy sketches or really short plays and performances and spoken word things. So it's a nice mix of different things and sharing their culture in that way. And then I'd say that last year, actually, in the last couple of years, the international students have started to expand a little bit and have some more events, things like reading, having a poetry night with poems that are read from each student's home country, or having panel discussions about current topics that are happening in different countries. So they've really started to expand beyond the 1 day event that it's traditionally been.
We're talking to Bridget Flaherty on lcpioneers.com live. You can join us Tuesday through Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time on Facebook Live. Just bookmark lcpioneers.com/live. And then, of course, on our YouTube page, you can find all of our past shows in case you ever miss anything. So everyone's been changing and adapting to the conditions of the pandemic, and that's no different than for International Fair. Give us an idea, describe what's going to happen with this year's event.
Sure. So, yeah, we've been starting to plan this since in the fall semester because we knew it would have to be different than what it typically looks like. And so, really, what we've done is expanded it to a full week this year. And instead of the students making the food themselves, since that's not allowed right now due to COVID, basically the chefs in Bon Appetit will be making the food using the recipes provided by the students and working closely with the students to make the food taste as authentic as possible. And they'll be serving those meals throughout the week during both the lunch and dinner times. And so students can basically have all of their meals for that week be coming from all over the world. And then the other piece is for the performances, will be pretty limited in terms of any type of in person events. And so mostly it will be different types of virtual events that will be happening. I think it will be along the same lines as some of the extra events that students have done in the past, things like panels or maybe things like a poetry night, an international trivia night, as well as doing some performances like they would typically do, but having those cast like broadcast online instead of being in person.
Well, and I've talked about this with coaches and other guests on the show, but I imagine that maybe even though we'd prefer things to be different, there's some value in the opportunity now to share, virtually some of the things that happen on campus. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll definitely share information on our social media channels about the International Fair. I want to close out with this then. We talk all the time about favorite aspects about Portland and about Lewis and Clark. And one thing that you mentioned is you went to school in the Portland area. So you've been around here quite a bit with 10 years now at Lewis and Clark. When you tell people about our area and our campus, what are some of your favorite things to highlight about what we have to offer students and people?
Well, I think part of it, I talked about earlier is the community itself. Like that's something that I often talk to prospective students about when I'm meeting with them and talking about Lewis and Clark. But of course, one thing that draws a lot of students here is the location itself. And so I do point out the things that students can be doing both on and off campus. And so, the reason that I came to college in Portland and that I returned and have lived here is because I love the Portland area and I love the nature that surrounds us. And so that's something that I'll talk to students about is ways that they can just walk straight off campus and be on a nature trail right away. Going to like the Tryon Creek State Park nearby and being able to do miles of hiking trails there. But then also taking advantage of the greater area around us. Like usually every weekend I'm trying to get outside and do some kind of hike or go to the coast or something along those lines. So I think that for me it's the combination of the people here and the location that we're in that I think are some of the best things about Lewis and Clark and the Portland area.
Well, I've mentioned this numerous times, the show specifically, but then I've also been in numerous events and education opportunities with you in recent months, if you will, over the course of post spring semester, if you will. And I bring that up only to say it's nice to slow down and have a chance to get to know some people on campus better, because when we're in season, that typically isn't the case. So not only for joining us today, but also for being so interactive over the course of a virtual environment, if you will. Bridget Flaherty, thank you so much for joining us on lcpioneers.com live and everything that you bring the Lewis and Clark community.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. A lot of fun to get to know a little bit about international students and scholars today. Bridget Flaherty joining us on the show. I have not had an opportunity to experience International Fair, and part of the reason usually is because the springtime is one of our busiest times in athletics. A lot of events that are going on. We have the most teams participating in the springtime, so this is going back to trying to find positives in a situation that you otherwise wouldn't want to be in with a global pandemic. It'll be nice to get to see the work that ISS puts into the International Fair as it happens over the course of that full week in March. And so we'll be able to share some of that information with you on our social media channels. Again, LC Pioneers on basically everything, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And then, of course, we'll try to maybe even spotlight it again, talking to a student on lcpioneers.com live. And there is that overlap that Bridget talked about between student athletes and the International Students and Scholars Office. So a lot of tie-ins there, and I certainly appreciate Bridget taking the time to talk to us about that today. The rest of the week looks like this. We'll have a show tomorrow. We'll talk to head coach of men's and women's tennis, Jimmy Chow. Third appearance by Jimmy on the show. And a week from now, we are expected to talk to one of the men's tennis alumni. So looking forward to that. We'll share those on our Facebook Live page as soon as we can. And then no show on Thursday. We have a student life division meeting, so we'll be focused in on that. No live show on Thursday, but on Friday, Ian Sheppel will join us to talk about men's swimming and the upperclassmen years that Ian's had with the Lewis and Clark Pioneers swimming program. You can find all of our past shows available at youtube.com/LCPios. So to Bridget for joining us, for you watching, I'm Ryan Goff. Thank you so much for having fun with us Tuesday through Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time on Facebook Live. And then also the immense response we've seen for those not only watching live, but on our YouTube page and inside the fan zone at lcpioneers.com. I'm still kind of blown away by the amount of views that we get after the live show, because I realize that 11:30 a.m. Pacific time might be lunch for those on the West Coast, might be in the middle of the afternoon for those on the East, and wherever you are around the world, it is nice to know that having them available to watch on demand has been so useful. So thank you for the support and staying connected with us through the show, whether it's talking to student athletes, coaches, alumni, or as we did today, members of the Lewis and Clark College community. We will see you again tomorrow for another show, and until we do, thanks so much for having fun. We'll see you then. Goodbye, everybody.
My favorite spot on campus is like right outside the Dovecote, little benches, and there's flowers growing there, and you can get a little coffee at the Dovecote and sit there.
My favorite spot on campus is definitely the weight room. I get that everybody loves like the gardens or the manor house, but our facilities for athletics here are actually amazing too, and the weight room is definitely my favorite spot.
My favorite spot on campus would either be the glade outside of the athletic facilities or South Campus.
What is my favorite spot on campus? I really like the back porch of the manor house. It looks out on Mount Hood, and on a clear day, it's super beautiful just to sit around with friends.
I'm Casey Jones, and I teach a range of classes: general chemistry, organic chemistry, and also some advanced classes. And I have a research lab that currently I have 4 students working with me as part of the Rogers program. The summer experience is a way to get really deeply involved in the science that is here and be able to start to define what might be what you want to do next. So the brown bag gives our students a chance to explain their research and really show the context and the application of what they're doing to a very broad range of students and faculty.
It's interesting to be able to communicate to other scientists what your work is, and it forces you to learn how to talk about your subject so that not only experts in your field can understand it, but others can understand it as well, which I just believe is a good life skill.
To talk about your research in a way that anybody can understand it really is a valuable experience, and it's something that you don't get a lot of practice for except in these contexts. Because oftentimes you're giving a presentation to a classroom filled with people who know basically the same things that you do, but in a brown bag, you have to be able to explain and provide motivation for everything that you're working on and why it's important and why it's relevant to be studying.